Hello. Today we are finally getting to speak to someone that we've been meaning to speak to for well over a year now. Please welcome Anne. She's coming to us from Alberta. Welcome, Anne, and where I know it's cold.
It is.
Yeah.
It's very cold. Thank you.
Welcome.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm pretty good. Yeah. Um, might be coming down with something slight that I picked up from my
Mm.
grandson, but like
Oh,
yesterday I
those
was like, "Oh, I
children
don't
and their
feel well."
viruses.
Last night I was like, "I don't feel well." But this morning I was good. So I'm like, "Okay, it's good. It's good. It's fine."
Better than I.
Yeah, talk yourself out of getting sick. That's what I always try
Yes,
Exactly.
to
that's what I
do.
did. Mind over matter. So there
Yep,
you go.
exactly.
Yeah, you have a lot of updates. So tell us, from the beginning because we've delayed this, but you had some stuff happening last year even. So how do you want to start?
Oh, I watch you guys start this and then people like go off on tangents, which I am really good at. And then you're always, let's go back to this, let's go back to this. So I was thinking yesterday, it's like, where do I start?
Well, how
Um,
about with birth
yeah, so
and
that's what I figured.
adopters
So I
and
was like running through this with my husband yesterday. And so I'm a baby scoop. So early 60s, 1963. I was born in Iowa. Uh, Went through Catholic Charities. From my adopted parents went through Catholic Charities. My birth mother was from the city uh, just to the west of where I grew up. In fact, my adopted dad's sister's husband's family is from there, and she eventually moved there in the 70s. And I have since found out that when I was there, I was surrounded by my mother's and father's families because the area where my aunt lived was where they mostly lived. My my half brother, my maternal half brother, went to the same high school as one of my cousins, actually several of my cousins. He knew my cousins' cousins, like grew
Wow.
up with them, um, knew their dad, my aunt's brother-in-law, taught at the high school he went to.
Mm.
Um,
I
and
mean,
he
Iowa's
he
so
was he was
small, right? It
blocks.
makes
He was
sense.
he was
Yeah.
blocks away from me at different points. It's kind of crazy
Mm-hmm.
to think that they were really close the whole time,
Mm.
and I had no idea, and they had no idea.
Yeah.
Um, it was, I guess it was common in that time period to kind of keep children in the same area where they were born, which, I would think would be problematic if you wanted to hide people, but that's what they did. So, I mean, for all of my siblings, we were all kind of born within an hour-ish of where our parents kind of were. So go ahead. You were about to ask
Oh,
me
I
something.
just was
Yeah.
curious how many of you were adopted and what was the birth order?
So I'm the oldest. I'm the
Mm.
oldest of my
Okay.
adopted family, and I'm the oldest of all of my siblings, obviously, because my
Same.
parents were quite young. I have two younger adopted sisters and a younger adopted brother. And I have, let's see, I gotta count them all up. I have four younger brothers, biological brothers, and a younger sister. So it's like
Wow.
I tell people now I'm
Yeah.
the oldest of eight.
I always said, I think it was 13,
Yeah, there's a lot
3,
of us.
6, and 4. Yeah, something
Oh,
like
that's
that.
weird, sir. I didn't
Yeah,
even think
yeah.
of
My
that.
younger my
13.
my younger adopted brother actually has me beat because his father, his biological father, was quite prolific.
Oh.
And at last count, there were probably seven of them who were born to various mothers. And there are like three that he had with various wives. So,
Wow.
and he's the oldest of all of them.
So were your adoptive parents couldn't have children?
They couldn't have children. My adopted mom had endometriosis and
Mhm.
had to have a hysterectomy, which was like maybe a yearish before I was born. And they put in their application to Catholic Charities. here's where the story gets a little bit weird. The director of Catholic Charities at the time was my adopted dad's best friend from high school.
Oh,
Hmm.
Yeah.
so
I would, I was like,
moved up the
oh,
list.
yeah,
Mhm.
that's
Did they
not
get a
sketchy at all.
discount? Did they
You
get a
know,
discount?
I
Discount.
we discovered
Friends
when
and
we were
family?
we discovered when we
Bargain.
were looking for information, or when I was looking for information, that the home study doesn't
Mm.
exist.
Oh,
It
you
is not in my file.
didn't need one.
No, my mother remembers somebody coming to their house. Um,
So does
but
mine. That's interesting. And I don't have
but
that home
but
study.
the home study's not in, it's not in my adoption file.
Is
My
it in?
Nor is
my
mine. I just
my
realized that.
adopted mother called them, because I was like, there has to be a home study. So she called, and the social worker's like, no, there's no home study. And I asked about it too when I talked with the social worker, and she's like, nope, no home study. And it's like, okay. And then when I found out that Father Tom, who my dad's friend, was the director, I
Mhm.
was like, okay, did they get jumped in the line, or
I'm
what
sure.
happened? Because it doesn't sound on the up and up with me.
How old
But
were your adoptive parents?
my mother was 18. She had just turned 18, because
What?
her birthday is
Your
like
your
2 weeks before
adoptive
mine.
mother was
No, no,
18.
no, sorry, my birth
Oh,
mother. My
Oh, I was
adopted
like,
okay.
parents
gee,
were
that's
much older. They were
different.
31 and 35
Oh,
when I was
okay.
Okay.
born. Sorry, I
Okay.
got that mixed up in my
I
head.
was like, what they're giving? Because I
No,
thought,
no, 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 no,
my adoptive
no.
parents were 23, and I think that's young
It is
for an
young.
My adopted parents were old compared to most of my friends, my peers. Their parents were much younger. And I remember being kind of like, why is everybody else's parents so young and my parents are so
Yeah.
old by comparison? Because my parents were the same age as parents who had kids who were older than me.
Hmm.
So, it always was like, oh, this seems kind of unfair that my parents are not.
When there's one thing you're saying your adopted mom even helped call and stuff. So were they open when you were young? How was that
Okay,
dialogue?
so I have always known that I was
Mhm.
adopted. I was thinking about this last night. My mom got a book from the library. I'm gonna like mess up the mom thing, because sometimes I'm talking about my adopted mom. Sometimes I'm talking about I'll just call my birth mom Janet. All right. So she got a book from the library, and she read it to me, and I always thought the book was about me, because she, called the little girl Anne. When I was about 10, I found the book at the library in the children's section, and I was really upset to learn that the girl's name was Barbara. It
Oh,
was not Anne at all. And but I always knew. But she told me um kind of against my dad's wishes. He did not want me to know I was adopted,
yeah,
which is crazy, because
that always goes well.
everybody in the family knew I was adopted. All their friends knew that we were adopted. Like, we would have found out, but he did not want her to tell me. But I
Oh
knew.
my gosh.
I don't know if or when she told my sister, who's the next from me, so she's almost 2 years younger than I am. But my brother surprised the hell out of me one day, not too long ago, telling me, you told me I was adopted. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah. He said, I was
Mm.
7 years old, and you told me that we were adopted, and I did not know until then. And I was like, oh, well, I feel bad now, because apparently, I mean, I must have told all of my siblings that we were adopted. Yeah.
That's
I was very
I
inquisitive, though.
mean,
I asked all the time when I was little
but
about
so you don't
my mother,
remember, like,
but I don't
you don't
remember
remember,
being told myself. Like,
and
the
do you
first time I
remember
was told,
telling your siblings?
I don't. Like, I was like, no, I
it's
did not
big
tell you.
news
And
when you're
he's like,
older.
yes, you did. And I'm
You
like,
remember
really?
it.
I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, because that was not a thing I should have done. But I would have been like 9, almost 10 when
Well,
that
and was your
happened.
dad in that same frame? Let's not tell them, and maybe was mad that your mom had told you, or and now you're
He
like
was
outing
mad. You
everybody.
know what? But I didn't know that he was angry about it until I was much older. Like, I had no idea the dynamics that was going on. I knew probably in my 20s that all of our adoption information was gone, because he burned it.
What?
Mhm.
What?
And
What's what's the deal,
my mother
Dad?
didn't say so, but I think the reason he did was because of me, because I was constantly asking. And then in our teens, my sister, who's right behind me in line, she started pushing also for information, which I didn't know about. My mom actually took her to the hospital to try to get records at one point when she was about 15 or 16. So I don't know when he destroyed all the records. I just know that he did. And
Oh, that's terrible.
they had quite a few. Um they were given more information than they should have been, apparently.
Oh,
So
Like
they
what
had
kind of information were they
like
given?
names,
Oh,
really?
which I only learned about when I found my mother. And that's part of my story. That's a little bit farther into the story.
Yeah.
But yeah, they had a lot of information about everything. Probably my youngest sister, they had the least amount of information about her, but they had way more information, and they would let it slip. It slipped because of course it did. Like,
Hmm.
I knew when I was in high school, my mother let it slip about my birth mother's name. So that she said she had said something, oh, your birth mother's name was Janet. I'm like, what? Well, I think it was Janet, trying to
Hmm.
cover for herself. And she told me my birth name when I was in high school. I had a classmate who changed her name, because that's what kids in high school do. And I came home and I was just like, oh my God, she changed her name to Yvette. Who would change their name to Yvette? That's such an old lady name. And my mom just burst out laughing and she's like, that's your name. And I'm
Oh,
like, no, it was not. And she goes, yeah, it was. So like
it's kind of interesting. So your mom was sort of
she didn't
open,
mean
like
to.
dabbling or
Yeah, but she didn't
something.
mean to though. Like it was just stuff she knew and it just came out because she, ultimately she knew my mother's name, her first and last name, and they had some ideas about where she might be. Um, and they did not tell me, even though when I was young, I repeatedly asked,
Oh,
like, do you know where she is? How is she? Is she okay? I was very concerned about my birth mother's welfare when I was a kid,
yeah,
how
which
was how was growing up in your adoptive family? And I mean, that's a lot of adopted
a
kids, and
lot.
you have a bunch
so
6 DNA strangers in the
yeah,
same
Right?
house.
well, yeah, and we were four kids growing up in the same house. We were not close at all. We were not particularly well bonded. We get along really well now, but I would say that the relationship we have is only within the last 5 or 6 years that we've established like a relationship, like more friend-ish type relationship than, but we didn't have that growing up. We all just kind of went our separate ways. Um, and I just chalk that up to trauma.
Hmm.
My sister, who's right after me, I remember her as a baby and as a toddler, and she was just always on edge, burst into tears for
Oh,
absolutely no reason. My mother tells the story of how the first 6 months she just
Hmm.
cried all the time, and they said colic, right? But
yeah.
it was probably separation stuff. Her mother really wanted to keep her,
Hmm.
and but the the grandfather was like, no, not going to do this, even though the mom and the sisters were like, yeah, we could do this, and he's like, no, not doing this. So she was also named and everything. My brother, uh he too, trauma. He was a very excitable, um wild kid. And so like we were just all kind of surviving, and our parents never dealt with their infertility issues.
Hmm.
But I was
So
gonna
that was a
say that's why
huge.
your dad
I don't
had
think
that.
any of them did in that
No,
era,
no,
right? I
they didn't.
mean,
And it
same.
was they tried for like 7 years
Yeah.
before, she finally had to have a hysterectomy, and then it really changed their marriage, their relationship. And so there was that. My adopted dad was also an alcoholic,
Mm.
Mm.
which just got worse and worse as we got older. So, and my mother was not really suited to be a stay-at-home mom. So one of the stipulations, basically, do you have the $500 and are you going to be a stay-at-home mom? Those were like really the only things that they asked. And so she had a job and she really liked it and stuff, but she had to quit to when I came along. And then, of course, she couldn't go back to work. And there's a period in the year where me, my sister, and my brother are like 3 years apart, literally in age. We're just boom, boom, boom. So she had like 3 kids
A
under the age of
lot. It's a
4
lot of
at one
stress.
point.
I'm
And
curious, why did they adopt so many? I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
I don't know because they only were going to get 2.
right.
So they adopted me. And then they adopted my sister like almost 2 years later, and that was going to be it. And then they got a call just out of, and they like, we have a baby. Can you take him? And they were like, okay. So they did. And the same thing with my younger sister. They got a call. We have a baby because they weren't even in the system at this point.
is this
They
because they were friends with the
Yeah, I think so.
yeah,
I think
okay.
that's what it was. And, my dad had wanted to have a big family. Like he talked about having 10 kids, right, when they got married and stuff. I don't know why my mom signed up for that. Honestly, I would have been like, oh, okay, thanks.
Sure
Different
different
time.
than today, right? Like
Yeah.
today
Right.
there's 45 couples waiting for the one baby
It's a little bit crazy because that's a lot of kids to let one couple adopt,
I
Yeah, it
know.
sure is.
especially in the span of like 5 years.
Well, I mean, I guess the baby scoop era was,
Yeah.
it was the perfect storm for
For that kind of thing.
for
Yeah.
a ton of kids, ton of babies being out there.
And
Yeah.
your father had the in. So like
Yeah,
if there
he
Hmm.
was a
did.
problem, something happening quickly, they could just kind of
Right. So we were, except for my youngest sister, we were all like about 2 weeks old when we were adopted. So, didn't spend a lot of time. I know a lot of people angst over where was I? Because you were like gone. You
yeah.
Hmm.
disappeared for like months. Like
Right.
where were you? What was going
Even
on?
2 weeks, I still think, gee,
But
sad.
I know exactly where I was. I was at Mercy Hospital.
Mm.
Because that's where the unwed mother's home was. It was
Oh.
literally in their hospital. There was a wing there. In my research, I found this out. And the uh, the young women, teenagers, most of them, not all of them, but most of them, they were just in the hospital in this wing, basically waiting to have this baby. They were charged room and board. It was $145 a
Oh
month,
my goodness.
which was a lot of money back then.
Yes.
Hmm.
And they also had to work. So they either worked in the dining room or they worked in the laundry. So my birth mother worked in the dining room. I know that because in the non-identifying information, it said that she created the placemats for the holidays because she was an artist. She was very, very talented.
I have a
My
quick
sister's
question.
mother was in the laundry. I know that because I had her ask about it. So she was forced to work in the laundry.
I have a quick question. When the mothers gave up their babies for adoption, was the debt forgiven?
No, it wasn't.
Oh,
Oh my
So
goodness.
according to the social worker, one of my mother's big worries when she left was that she would not be able to pay back the money she owed
Oh my
because
God.
she
How
she left
gross.
owing them money because her parents did not pay it.
just more
And
ways to be infuriated.
my cousin, my uncle's, my mother, my birth mother's older brother, his daughter told me that, my mom and dad, our parents grew up poor. They did not. That's kind of a thing that they tell me, but they weren't poor. My grandfather was pretty well off, despite the fact that he was a completely awful person with a lot of problems. But they had the money. It wasn't a question of them not having the money. It was a question of them not helping her.
Sure. Yeah.
It was a punishment for her. She broke the rules in their eyes. She was involved with a guy who wasn't Catholic and who was actually poor, and in their eyes, kind of white trash, I
Mhm.
guess. And they actively thwarted that relationship. My birth parents were broken up at the time that she found out she was pregnant because my uncle, her older brother, forced her to break up with him. And so he didn't know about me. There are two versions of the story. One I got from my cousin, because my uncle won't talk to me because I would get the truth out of him probably. So the version he told his daughter was that he went looking for my father to tell him, you need to do the right thing. And when he told my father this, he said, your dad just walked away. He just turned around and walked away. When I finally talked to my dad about it, he's just like, your uncle was a terror. He was a bully. He was bigger than me. I was terrified of him. He said, if I saw your uncle, I took off in the other direction. He said, we never had a conversation.
Yeah.
If he did come looking for me, I ran away. He said, because your uncle was well known as somebody who beat people up almost for fun. And he said he hated me and I was afraid of him. And no, there's no way we had any conversation. And I believe that
Yeah.
because my cousins will gleefully tell you stories of how my uncle randomly beat people up when they were kids.
Nice.
Like their favorite story to tell is they were leaving one Sunday morning and somebody sped by the house too fast for my uncle's liking. So he ran up and caught him at the stop sign, pulled him out of his car, beat him up, left him, went back, got in the car, and they drove to church. And this is a story that my cousins tell about their own dad, right? So I don't just I believe my dad when
Yeah.
he says that he was terrified of my uncle. So no,
I
that
doubt he knew. I doubt he knew.
he did not know. So like to get to the very beginning of the story, she found out she was pregnant. She tried everything to convince her family to help her keep me. Her dad was like flat out no. Her mom was somewhat convinced that, if you can find the money, sure. But, on her own, she was 17,
Yeah.
not quite graduated from high school, and she didn't have the money. And the only other person who could help was my uncle, her brother, and he said, no, no, I won't help you. So that was kind of that. She had something happened and she ended up hospitalized and was diagnosed with severe depression. I don't know what it was. Usually the only way you can end up hospitalized is if you attempt to harm yourself. So I'm thinking she either tried to commit suicide maybe, or she tried to get rid of me. One or the other thing happened. There's no other explanation for her being hospitalized. And then when she got out, they sent her away. So she was at Catholic Charities in Dubuque for like 6 months, which is a long time. Usually the girls did not go into those homes until they were much farther along because they hid their pregnancies and stuff. The social worker, when she was going through all the non-identifying stuff, said that, your mom was under psychiatric care the entire time she was here.
Talk about trauma.
Yeah. She did not sign the relinquishment papers until I was about 3 days old. The fact that I had a name indicated to the social worker that she did know that I was a girl, obviously, and she probably did spend time with me because it took, it wasn't an instant, like, I was born the next day she signed papers. It was a couple of days. So she did not do it right away, but she did do it. And then, she was gone by the time I was placed. But I was probably at the hospital the whole time in the nursery there.
I
That's
was going
kind
to
of
ask
most
that.
standard. There was nowhere else. I do know there was a children's home, which the Catholic Charities operated out of. That was like their administrative offices. But I don't think that that's where babies were. I think they just were in the nursery at the hospital. And then you just went from there to the offices and then you were handed over. I asked my mom actually the other day, I'm like, what was I wearing? Did you bring an outfit for me? And she's like, oh no. She said, you were just wearing, she goes, I don't even remember what you were wearing. There is a picture of me from that day because it was almost Christmas. And they had, and this is actually really gross when you think about it. There's a picture of me under the tree with a little ribbon on me.
Well, present.
Yeah, and I was
So,
wearing the outfit that I was sent home in, which is just one of those little onesies, long sleeves and zip up and footies and all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
so, you were brought into your family, you have all these siblings. How was it for you?
Yeah, emotional.
You kept telling that you told all your siblings they were adopted. Clearly, this was on your
Oh,
mind.
it was always on my mind. And I was always asking about my mother, always.
Did you feel misplaced or lost or not belonging, or was
Yes, and
that stuff that came?
I can look back and go, yes, that's what I was feeling. At the
Mm-hmm.
time, I would not have been able to tell you that, yeah, I
Right,
felt out of place.
right,
But I didn't look like anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and as I got older, I looked like my parents, my actual parents, right? And when I see pictures of them as children, so many, I'm like, oh, well, I was normal, like the way I look, because I always felt like I wasn't. I was
right.
much taller. I was tall as my adopted dad when I was about 10 or 11. Um, and I was very red hair, freckles, and I'm kind of long armed and legged and lanky. And when I was like preteen, I was a little overweight and stuff. All very normal because that was how my biological parents were. When I see pictures of them, I look like them. But for my adopted parents, they who were both smaller people, and like my adopted siblings were all very kind of smallish too. I there must be something wrong with you. So like I was sent to I was put on diets when I was like 10,
Oh
11,
man.
which only made everything worse. And
Mm-hmm.
I got this from not just my parents, but from their friends, from extended family, that I was always made to feel like there was something wrong with the way I looked.
Oh,
So I never felt like I really belonged or anything. I had learning disabilities, which baffled my father, my adopted father, because I was like really super smart at some things, and then other things were just like, what?
yeah.
I do not
Which is
understand what you
normal,
are
as we
talking
know.
about.
Yeah.
Right. So like, so I disappointed him in a lot of ways. And I was naturally kind of gifted at sports, yet I don't have a competitive nature. So my father, who very much wanted me to play organized sports, and I liked playing sports. I didn't like the organized part of it though. So again, I was disappointing him in a lot of
Mm,
ways. So I just felt like I didn't really belong. I mean, to my adopted parents' credit, they did indulge me in a lot of things. Like I loved to write when I was little, and they encouraged that. I was a voracious reader. Like I read all the time, which apparently my birth mother was also the same way. Um, and to their credit, they went out of their way to make sure I always had books. They subscribed to the newspaper and magazines and all sorts of stuff so that I could be kept in reading material. So, I mean, they did recognize that I was different from them in ways that they encouraged, but if it wasn't something that fit with the way they really wanted me to be, then they found ways to like try to fix me. So,
How did you do how did you do with boyfriends, friends? How did you feel out in the world?
in the world, I know
Hmm.
so I mean, I've come to realize recently that I have ADHD.
Mm,
And so you know how that is. It's like
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
it's difficult interactions with other people. Um, but I did not feel like I fit in with a lot of people,
Hmm.
and it was difficult making friends. I'm very hypersensitive, so making friends was
Yeah.
difficult, and keeping them. People who know me will say, "Oh, well, you're really friendly and you're easy to get along with and stuff." But I never really felt that, and I never really felt like I belonged. I kind of hung back. I had a friend from high school once tell me when we were older and out of college, actually, she's just like, you could have been popular. Like, I never understood why you hung out with us. You could have been one of the popular kids. Like, you could talk to anybody, you could be in any group, and yet you chose to be with us. They were band kids and stuff, right? And and she's kind of right. Like, there were times where there were doors I could have walked through and I just went, nope. And I would go in the other direction, right? And some of it
Yeah.
I think was probably just the whole adoption thing, just the fact that I just never felt that I was where I was supposed to be.
Mhm.
Pretty
Mm-hmm.
much my whole, like, that's pretty much my whole life. Like, most of my life, it's
Yeah.
like I am not really where I'm supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. I was just thinking about that last
I
night
know.
about fitting in and belonging. Like I can fit
Yeah.
in anywhere,
Yeah.
but I
Exactly.
belong nowhere.
Yeah,
There's,
Yeah.
we're
I
we're
don't
we're
feel there's
chameleons because
one
we've been
place
that
I
way since we were
belong.
born, right?
That's
Mm-hmm.
We
right.
had to adapt, and we had to
Mm-hmm.
adapt like
And
from
assimilate
birth.
and
Yeah,
Mhm.
and so as a result of that, because that's our primary training, that's what we do all the time. We're constantly adapting to other people.
mm-hmm.
But at some
Still.
point it becomes too much, and then we're
Yeah.
like, okay, and we just let go. And we
Then
and we disappear, right? And
And
then
mm-hmm.
people are like,
disappear.
where have you been? I was like, I didn't, I've been around. I just have not been around here because it got to be too much for me. So,
Yeah.
but
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of hung back when I was younger. And people, oh, she's just shy. She's
Right.
just shy. But it was mostly because I was overwhelmed by a lot of things. Like, my younger sister, like I said, she was always bursting into tears when she was little, and that was how she dealt with being overwhelmed. And my brother acted out because that's how he dealt with being overwhelmed. And I just would disappear. There are so many pictures of me like that they would take of me hiding behind furniture, playing with
Mhm.
toys and stuff, because that's what I did. I did not like to be out in the open and doing something that was revealing.
Mhm.
So I would hide
It's
when I
interesting you're
when I
saying
was being
that.
when I was being
Yeah.
myself, I was always hiding.
Yeah.
And when I was being the adopted child, then I was out in the open.
Yeah.
So I wonder sometimes, like, how much of me is a persona and how much of me is me.
I feel like we're
Um,
always going to be wondering this. It's I mean, as you're talking, I'm picturing myself behind curtains and in the little closet
mhm.
I would hide in and have my little conversations and then come out and you have to act different. It's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah,
Hmm.
it is. It is. So anyway, I kind of grew up in this rather dysfunctional home,
Hmm.
with three other siblings who were also coping as best they could, and I
And an
left.
alcoholic parent
That's
adds
what
And
an
I
an
was gonna
alcoholic
entirely
say.
different
parent.
layer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I left to go to university. I wasn't going to go, but I fell in with the wrong crowd at school, basically academics, and they were like, "Oh yeah, you should go to university." And I'm like, "Nah, I don't think so," because I hated school. It was just like,
Yeah.
no, I want to be done with school. And they all went to take the ACT one weekend, and what do you mean you're not taking it? And I'm like, I'm not going to university. Yes, you are. So they peer pressured me into taking the ACT, and lo and behold, I did well enough to get accepted at a few schools, so I went. And
Probably
that
the
was
best
that
thing
was
that happened, right?
probably, and
Yeah.
I really never lived at home again after that, except for breaks and things like that. I went University of Iowa. I got English major and a teaching degree. And when I graduated, I was home for a little bit, found a job, moved to the middle of the state, the Des Moines, and I taught there for like 20 years.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
and then I met a guy on the internet. Back when meeting people on the internet was kind of weird, and people went, "What?" And then I moved to Canada, and
Oh,
that's why
that's
I'm
how you
here.
ended up in
That's how
Canada.
I ended up in
Mm.
Canada. Yeah, that's a
Oh
whole other story of
man.
me just showing up at the border one day saying I'm marrying a Canadian, and the immigration officer was like, why don't you come into my office and we'll discuss this?
Did you, had you started your search or anything?
So no. So my younger sister searched early 2000s. And I did not know it, but at the time, Catholic Charities was actually starting to help people search. And but I didn't know that. Nobody told me that.
Catholic
Uh,
Charities in Iowa.
Catholic Charities in
Yeah.
Iowa, yeah. And
Oh,
they were helping with the search, but I didn't search. At that point, I had already gone to them and put a letter in my file in case one of my parents came to find me,
Mm,
so that they had information to find me. But that I did that when I was like in university, and I'd never heard from anybody. Nobody ever showed up, no phone calls, nothing. So I just kind of assumed that my parents didn't want to know about me or find me. And you know how it is. You're just like, well, I don't want to show up in their lives. Maybe they went on to have a great life without me, right? And I don't want to ruin that.
yeah.
Who knows, like this, I don't want to be that person who shows up. I actually had a neighbor growing up. There were a lot of actually adopted families in the area where I grew up, which is crazy.
interesting.
So their family, like the block over, both of their kids were adopted, and the oldest boy's mother showed up
Mm.
when he was about 18. And I remember everybody being horrified. And he was actually very upset by that too. And so, that was my experience with reunion at that point, was this mom showing up and being so glad to have found her son, and and his parents being really upset, and then him being really upset by it. So I was just like, oh, I don't know how I feel about that.
It shaped you.
It
Mm-hmm.
kind of shaped me a little bit. Um, and I was always told, right, you are better off, and she is better off, and your dad's probably a deadbeat.
Mm.
And so,
The
and also,
stories.
I
Yeah.
didn't know that my dad was even alive. I mean, that was Vietnam era.
Mm.
So I wasn't even sure that he was alive. So I was like, but once I had the internet, I started looking every year on my birthday. I would plug in all the information that I had just to see what would come up. I would go and look at registries and stuff. I've never found anything because nobody really was actively looking for me. And
Did you
so
have children?
so yeah, I have a daughter who's in university. And so what happened is my brother decided to do a DNA test because his daughters were like, Dad, we need to know where we came from.
Mm-hmm.
You need to go get a DNA test. So he did. This was in the spring, I think,
Is
of
this your
20,
adopted brother,
my
3 years
adopted brother.
younger? Okay.
Yeah. So 2019, he did a DNA test and instantly found family, like really siblings and stuff. And I helped him because I was on Ancestry, and I kind of helped him do his little searching stuff. And my daughter was like, "You should do that.
Yeah.
But you should do that. And then we would know." She really just wanted to know if she was English. Because she's like, she had been to the UK, and she's like, it would be really cool if we were English, wouldn't it? And I'm like, okay, I guess. So I didn't do anything, but I was helping my brother, and he was finding siblings, and I helped him find his father who had died, and his mother who still really won't admit that she's his mother.
Oh,
And
that's painful.
it is. He has a brother who was also adopted, and they've actually established a relationship. But their mom is still she's curious about them, but she's like still very traumatized. I
Mm.
think she was very young. She was like 16,
Mm.
18. But
So
so my brother had found, and then was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. So I did the DNA test in like September of 2019. I got the results in November, and by my birthday, I had figured out who my maternal family was. I did not get any. I was disappointed because I didn't get any really close hits. They were like second cousin thing, you know how
Mm-hmm.
that is. And nobody responded because at the time I didn't realize you should be cagey about asking for information. I was like, "Hi, I'm adopted. I'm looking for parents." And of course, nobody responded to me except one woman who had multiple DNA tests, one for herself, and then I found out the others were for her children. And she's like, "Hi, I see we're very closely related, and I would like to help you." She goes, I don't have any idea where you fit in the family, though. Um, so I'm like, okay, cool. And we kind of figured we were first cousins, which we are, but we're half cousins because we're related through my grandfather, and we have the same grandfather, and he had multiple marriages.
Oh,
So her mother was from the first marriage, and my mother is from his second marriage. But his mother was estranged from her family because my grandfather was an alcoholic. And she had left home when she was like about 15. So she didn't really know much about the second family. And my cousin thought, well, maybe you're my aunt, her younger sister, my mom's other older half sister. Maybe you're her kid. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. Because she died before I was born. I'm like, okay, well, that's not an option. um,
I want to quickly ask, did your mother knew the name of your mother? Did you
oh
not
yeah,
know that she did?
right.
no,
How did,
I did not. So
Okay.
are you
anyway,
telling her this?
we
Are you telling her you're searching?
she knows I'm searching.
Oh,
This is the thing, right? She knows I did a DNA test, and when I got the results, I'm like, she's like, "Well, did you find anybody?" And I'm like, "No, there's nobody." It's really there are a few
and
matches,
she's
but they're not very
quiet.
close. And she's quiet. She's not saying
Mm.
anything. So my cousin and I figured out eventually that it was her mother's youngest sister, who she didn't know anything about at all, because again, there was estrangement in the family, and there's 20 years between my aunt and my mother.
Oh, it's big.
Yeah, because my grandfather was like in his 40s when he married the second time. And the only reason we figured it out is because in my non-identifying information that I had, I knew that my mother had an older brother. And my cousin was like, well, my sister had a younger half brother. And I think there was a sister, but I'm not sure because I never knew any of the family because we were not close at all. So I said, well, what was her name? And she said, well, her name was Janet. And I'm like, oh, really?
Oh, you remembered.
And I was like, huh, my mom's name was Janet, possibly.
Mm.
So I Googled up my mother and found out that she was dead.
Oh,
I was 100% positive, but I wasn't like, because I had this DNA connection to her. So I'm like, this has to be her. So I called up my mom and I'm like, so you remember when you told me that my mother's name was Janet? And she's like, yeah. I said, what was her last name? And she hesitated for like a second. And then she said it was Kane. And I'm like, yeah, it was, wasn't it? Because I found her and she's dead. And I said, you've known this all along, haven't you?
Wow.
And she's like, yes.
she knew
And
she was
and you
dead?
never, no, she knew that my mother's name. I said, you've known
Mm.
her name all along. And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, you never told me? Well, you always said you didn't
Wow.
want to know. And I did tell my parents that I didn't want to go looking, mostly because it was easier to tell them that. They didn't know that I looked all the time. There was a
Hmm.
lot of things that I didn't tell my parents about my life after I left home,
Me
right?
too. Me
Yeah,
too.
Same.
they did not know what I was doing, where I was, who I was with. Like there were so many things that I kept them out of. And she's like, well, and she tried to, excuse herself, and I just went off. I was so angry. I just ripped her, and then I hung up.
And is your father still alive?
No, and if he had been alive, my goodness, he would have gotten it worse
Yeah.
because he that's when I found out that
He
like it
burned
wasn't just a
everything.
little bit of
Yeah.
information he'd gotten rid of, it was a lot of information.
That's,
Apparently they even, when I was a baby, because they knew her name, they actually looked around the area where we lived to see, because they knew people with the same last name. And they were like, well, is she from this family or this family? Did they have a daughter that was the right age for this? So it's not like they were ignorant of the fact that I was probably related to somebody close by, they knew, and they actually speculated on it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I railed at my mother. I railed on social media. I was like so angry for weeks, to the point where my sister finally calls me and she's like, "You need to calm down," because mom is really upset. And I'm like, "Good. I'm glad she's upset. She needs to be
Now,
upset."
had you come out of the fog, as it were? Like, had you read anything or
I had
any?
never read anything about it. I I would see things, like stories would come up on like
Mm-hmm.
TV, like there was always these things, and I would be like, that is not how it is at all.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was always really angry about how they portrayed stuff. I don't know that I was never really happy about being adopted.
Yeah.
It was not a thing that made me happy. I wasn't as opposed to it as I am now, like openly opposed to it. But I was
Mm-hmm.
never like, oh, adoption is a great thing, right? Um, so I mean, that just made me ragey.
Mm-hmm.
And when my mother and I finally had a real conversation again about it, I'm just like, I'm never gonna forgive you for this. Like, we're gonna have a relationship, obviously, and we have, and it's gone forward, and it's better than it was. But I said, this is not a thing you get a pass on ever.
No.
Mm-hmm.
You just never do,
And
because
destroying
It's hard
the
to
right
stand up like that,
it is.
it's hard. I
yo,
admire you
no, I
for
know
Me
your
too.
ability to do it because
it
it's,
was, and my mother is 92 now, right? So she was in her late 80s at the time, and it's not like she has a choice but to accept how if we're going to have a relationship, you're just going to have to accept that I'm angry about this, and I'm not going to ever not be angry about this.
Yeah.
And you're just going to have to accept that you did this to me and it was wrong.
mm-hmm.
And to her credit, she apologized profusely. And, I know I did the wrong thing. I'm really sorry, and she has been supportive of everything I've done since, in terms of looking for my family and stuff. She doesn't really like to hear about it. Like, she has a finite amount of
Yeah.
interest in it.
I understand that. Yep.
But she has not, she accepts that what she did was wrong. And she's actually kind of come around to the idea that basically taking other people's babies is probably not best for them.
Mm-hmm.
But she goes, that's just what we did back then. And
Yeah.
they told us it was okay.
And she had a lot of pressure from your father, I'm
And she
assuming.
did have a lot of pressure
Yeah.
from my dad. So, and she goes, I just wanted to be a mom like everybody else. She goes, you know, that's what I wanted more than anything, was to be somebody's mother.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I get that. I understand that. So our relationship, I would say, is pretty good now, but for a while it was not. So anyway, from
So
there,
back to Janet. Yeah.
so
So,
back
and
to
then,
Janet. I'm an incredible sleuth, and the
mm-hmm.
internet is an amazing place, and you cannot hide on it.
That's the truth.
And so I started sleuthing, and I found all of my mother's family through an through her obituary.
Mm-hmm.
Then I found them on Facebook, and then I started figuring out which one I would contact. And the person I contacted ended up being the wife of one of my cousins, my first cousins, my uncle's kids. And I found out later, as soon as I contacted her, she immediately called my sister-in-law, my half-brother's wife, and said, "Guess what? Do you remember when we thought that Janet had a kid who she gave away? Well, guess who messaged me on
Oh, they
Facebook?"
knew?
So my uncle and his wife knew. Um, my their oldest
This is
son
the
at
mean
some point,
uncle.
the mean
Mm-hmm.
uncle, their oldest son at some point found out, not because they told him, he just overheard something and he found out. And then their daughter, who had gotten pregnant when she was 16, my
Oh,
mother had
the
told her,
irony.
yeah, had told her about me. So um, most of his kids knew, um, but my brother never knew. My mother never told him, and after she died, none of his cousins or his uncle told him about me. She died in 2014. So he's still kind of angry about that. He's like, okay, well, mom was alive. I can see why you didn't do that. But after she died, why didn't you tell me I had a sibling? Because, I was an only child as far as I knew.
Mm.
And, my mother died. And then a couple of years later, his stepfather died. And so he was kind of alone. And so, he's like, it would have been nice if I had known about, having a sister. He said, I would have been okay with that.
Yeah.
So anyway, I managed to get in touch with my my mother's family, talked a lot with my cousin and got a lot of information out of her and pictures. Eventually, it took my brother a little while to like absorb things, but we got in touch, and then in 2021, I went down and met him for the first time, and I see him
Is
once a
he
year.
still in Iowa?
He's still in Iowa, and he's still in the same town where
So crazy.
the
I
family
know. Yeah.
the family's at. So right. So, but he's the one who like knew my adopted aunt's family, knows all
Right.
of them,
Yeah.
like knows all
Gosh.
of them, like literally grew up with them, which
So
is
crazy.
crazy.
I
Yeah,
know
it's
it's crazy.
crazy.
I think
And
they stopped putting people in the same town. I mean, you could have dated your brother. You know what I mean? It's,
I know.
it's
Oh my
so,
It's like,
God.
you think about that. They're like a cluster of
Uh-huh.
yeah, no,
born and
it's
staying. And then, I mean,
yeah,
Uh-huh.
no, it's pretty wild. And
mm-hmm.
but my father was elusive, right? Like I could identify on Ancestry all of my mom's relatives because they were coming up with the same last names, and they were hooked to my cousin Nina. So I knew that
Oh.
they were maternal, but there were all these other people, and I'm like, well, they have to be on my dad's side. But who are they? So after a lot of badgering, my cousin finally got her mother to tell her my dad's name. They were cagey. They knew exactly who he was, but they were really cagey. Well, we think this is who he is. So I had a name, but I had no way to find him. And I was Googling the name and nothing was coming up because he was still alive, obviously. And so I turned to Facebook again. So there is a community page of a bunch of people who are the same age as my parents, my birth parents, who literally went to school with them. It's a bunch of,
Mm.
they're all nostalgic about high school and everything and
Oh,
stuff.
one of those
S-
pages.
One of those pages, right? Like growing up here was just like so much
That's
boomer
a good
fun,
idea, actually,
you
for
know?
others
Yeah.
listening. Yeah.
So I went to this page and I
Mm.
became a member, and I lied. I'm just like, like, why do you want to be a member here? I was like, oh, well, my mom grew up there and stuff, and I just want to know about her childhood and stuff.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so I'm in there sleuthing, and I'm not getting any information about her, because I think a lot of people knew she had a kid, um, but nobody talks about it, right? And my
Right.
uncle was on that page too. So, and they know him. So it could be that like everybody was kind of like, yeah, we're not going to say too much. But in my non-identifying information about my dad, it said that he loved motorcycles.
Mm.
And so I'm like, okay. So I started putting his name in with motorcycle. And weirdly, Cedar Rapids was like American graffiti in the early 60s. Like
Yeah.
motorcycle clubs and racing cars, they had a little track, an illegal track where they drag raced and stuff with old beater cars and stuff. And so one day my dad's name comes up in a conversation. So I instantly messaged this guy. It's like, so did you know him? And he's like, well, yeah, kind of. He was a little bit older than me. Actually, I went to school with his brother. And I'm like, well, he's my dad. And and I gave him the story, and I'm trying to track him down, but I can't find him anywhere. And, my mom's family is telling me, oh, he's probably dead. Right. And he's like, well, he said, I could just ask his brother because he lives 2 houses down from me.
Oh.
So I'm like, yeah, go and ask him. So he goes to my uncle, my dad's younger brother, and he says, there's this woman on Facebook who says your brother is her dad. And he says, and he gives my uncle my mom's name, and he goes, oh yeah, I remember her.
Oh, he
Yeah,
did.
Hmm.
The
they
younger
dated.
brother.
They
Yeah.
dated. Yeah. I totally remember her. And so he said, let me call my brother. So he calls up my dad, and he says, here's the story. And my dad's like, well, it's possible. it's possible that she's my daughter. Like, yes, we had a relationship. Yes, it's the right time period. But he said she was also dating other people because when she broke up with my dad, she told him she was breaking up with him to date someone else.
Mm.
So he wasn't like 100% convinced. And I got kind of mad when he was like, well, she was dating other people. I was like, what? You're slut shaming my mother?
My father did that. Yeah.
And so I was just like, well, okay, fine. And the guy that I was in contact with, he's like, that's how guys can be. He said, I had a situation like this in my family. And he said, let me tell you that if you were my daughter coming to look for me, I would be so thrilled.
Oh, this is the guy on Facebook?
This is the guy, total stranger on Facebook,
Brother,
right?
yeah.
No, not the brother. This is the
Oh,
neighbor.
the
The
This is the neighbor. And
motorcycle
he's
club.
like, he's like, don't feel bad. He said, this can happen because I had this actually happen in my own
Aw, he's
family when
nice.
somebody came looking and the dad was like, no. He said, but if this were me and you were looking for me, I would be thrilled that you were
Oh,
my daughter. This is what he told me. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll be mollified by this. But I was just like, okay, I know for sure he's my dad, and I have names now. So I started Googling again, and I found where my dad lived. I found all my siblings. I found them on Facebook, and then I was able to like plug in everything on the ancestry side, and I started researching that side of the family. And I just let it go. I'm just like, well, if he's not interested, then he's not. Like, there's nothing I can do about it. It was also pandemic because this was like 2020, the spring of 2020, and everything was shut down. So it's not like I can go to the US, the border's closed. And so I'm just like, well, I'll just let it go. So at the end of the year, I have somebody pop up as a very close match to me on Ancestry, who turned out to who I knew instantly because I had already found him on Facebook. He was my nephew.
oh,
My youngest sister's son turned up. And I'm like, well, there's my proof.
yeah.
I totally could prove that my dad is actually my dad. So I'm just like I messaged my nephew and I said, "Hi, I see that we're very closely matched, and here's why. Your grandfather is my dad." And
How
then
old's the nephew?
my nephew
20s?
is like in his 30s,
Oh, okay.
I
Yeah, go
think,
ahead.
and early 30s, I think. And so and he's like, "Wow, did not know this." And gave me some information and then said, I'm going to tell my mother about this and whatever. And then I didn't hear anything. Um, so my sister and my dad are not in a good place with each other. They're kind of estranged. She did not tell my dad that I had turned up on the ancestry. She did tell
Hmm.
both of her kids, and her daughter worked in a Wawa in uh, New Jersey. And who wanders in one day but one of my brothers? And she thought it was funny that grandpa had an illegitimate daughter. And so she walks up to him and says, hey, uncle, guess what? And she tells him about me. And my brother's like, what? Excuse me? He goes to my other brother and he's like, and they went to my dad and they're like, okay, spill. And he's like, okay, this is what happened. During the pandemic, um, when everything was shut down, this woman contacted my brother and he contacted me. And he's like, I didn't, maybe she was my kid. I didn't know. And of course, clearly she is my kid. And so, yeah, you have a sister. So
Wow.
then my youngest brother contacted me and we had some phone calls. My other brother, the one who had found out at the Wawa of all places, he emailed me and sent me some pictures. And that was kind of it. I didn't hear from him again for a long while. And then I kept in contact with my brother and played telephone with my dad through my brother for a while. I got sick of it, said, give me dad's email. I emailed him very long, like it's a book. It was
Yeah.
like this wall of text. And I I told him like my whole story. And then I said, you don't have to contact me. I know that. But I would be deeply hurt if you did not. And he wrote me back and we emailed back and forth. And he gave me information, answered all my questions to the best of his ability. And because he didn't know about me. And then I found out, then it kind of trickled and we didn't really contact each other for a couple of months. And I got kind of tired of that. So I found out from my brother that my dad now had an iPhone because he wanted to date. So I'm like, give me his phone number. And I started texting him. And then from then on, we have been in constant contact. So like
But
about
not
every couple
Have
of
meeting.
you met?
weeks. Yeah, we
Have you
did.
met?
So
Okay,
so
great. Yeah.
so my husband's like, you have to go meet him. He's old. What if he died? And then
Agree.
you had never met him because we had like FaceTimed once. He hates FaceTiming. And then but we texted all the time. Like constantly, he was sending me pictures. I would ask him a question. He would like turn over the earth to find the answer for me.
Oh,
And so I said, "Hey, is it okay if I'm going to be in the States? Is it okay if I come out to New Jersey and we can meet up?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure." And so yeah, so we picked a weekend, kind of settled on a weekend.
mm.
And then out of the blue, he's like, "Do you want to stay at my house?"
Hmm.
And
You're his only daughter, right?
no, there's my younger sister too.
Oh, okay.
Right.
I
So
missed
that
that
we
piece of it.
book
Sorry.
we almost bookend the family.
Yeah.
But so I'm just like to my husband, should we stay there? And he's like, yeah, if you want. It's weird, but if you want, we can do that because you've never met him in person, but you have been in pretty constant contact with him for over a year now, year and a half. So we went to New Jersey Memorial Day weekend and we stayed at his place. Got there on a Saturday morning, and it was really short because I was like, I don't want to stay too long
Yeah. I'd
because
feel the same
it's
way, nervous about that.
because I was like, I don't know, this could maybe he won't like me, right?
Of course.
So we get there. My brother, who initially had emailed me and sent me pictures, um, and had not contacted me again, he decided that he wanted to meet me. So he was there and his wife, and I walk in. My husband's parking the truck, and I walk in by myself, and my brother stands up and he's like, "You look just like Michael," who is his older brother, the oldest of my dad's family with his first wife, and who died in
Oh,
2005. And he's like, "You look just like Michael." My sister said the same thing to me. First thing out of her mouth when she met me was like, "You look just like Michael." And I'm like, "Do we hug?" And my sister-in-law was like, "Yes, we do." And she's just like throwing her arms around me. And so I hugged her and my brother and my dad. And then my dad just kind of sat on the sofa and we sat at the table and I told them the whole story of how I found them. And my brother was amazed because he was a cop and he just could not believe that I found out that much information about them because he thinks he's so hidden. And I'm like, "No, sweetie, you're
oh,
not. Like nobody is that hidden." And and we talked for probably about an hour. My brother told me later, he said, "I only planned to come and see you and then I was going to leave." But he ended up staying for like an hour and then he had to go get ready for work. And then he called me actually later on his break. It's like, let's meet tomorrow. And we talked for like almost 45 minutes on the phone
So this was
that
just
day.
recently,
This was just
right?
recently. This was just
Yeah.
last
Wow.
Memorial
So you're
Day.
oh,
still sort of
So
n-
yeah, so like it was really cool. He it was weird because like my dad is different than my dad, right? My adopted dad was very distant. He was like, depression era kid, very
yeah.
closed and not overly affectionate. Never really said he loved you and stuff like that. That was kind of rare for him. And my dad is so nurturing. That's the only
It
word I can
sounds
say.
like it with the text messages
Yeah,
and the
and
emails.
it was so weird. Like he was just like, yeah, help yourself. Here's this, here's this, here's this. If you need anything, let me know. Do you need to do laundry? Do you need like whatever? And he drove us to the pier. We did the boardwalk thing, like, and then he took us to see Lucy the elephant, like I was 6 or something, right? Like,
so
let's
cute.
go see Lucy the elephant,
Oh,
And it was like, wow, like, when we were on the boardwalk, I was looking for a t-shirt for my daughter. So he was like, well, here's a shop. Here's a shop. Oh, we have to stop here because we have to get, macaroons. And like, it was just so weird. It was just different
How do you
than the
feel
way
about
I've
it?
been parented before. So
Yeah, besides weird, like how do you feel? Is it hard to take in a little bit for
it
you?
was a lit. So when I'm around my biological family, it's like I've always been there. Like
Yeah.
I feel like I belong there,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm very aware that we don't have shared history.
I have
We
the
have
same.
no
Same.
shared
Yeah.
history. And so that puts a distance to it, right? That you're not going to just be able to overcome. I overcome it with family history because I know way more about our family history than anybody. And so I'm constantly sharing family history, like old family history. My brother, the cop, was like, "Do you ever find out things about our family that aren't horrifying or disturbing in some way?" And it's like, but those are the best stories, though.
So, you keep in obviously,
Yeah.
what about your mother, but your brother on your mother's side? Are you still in
Yes.
touch? And
So
okay,
yeah, no,
so
we're
you're
still
in
in, I
touch
like
with pretty much everybody that
I'm in
you.
touch with everybody who wants to be in touch with me. So
Hmm.
that weekend I met both my brothers. I met my sister. My sister only met me out of curiosity. Like I'm just curious. Um,
She
and
like
that's
being,
fine.
does she like being the only daughter?
Right, I
Was
was just thinking the same.
She and my dad though are not in a relationship. Like
Oh,
haven't
right,
been
you
for
Oh,
said
maybe
that.
that's
several years. So she there's a lot of stuff going on with her.
Okay.
She could be close to my dad if she wanted to. She does not want to. There a lot of things happened when their her parents' marriage broke up. Some things that I don't even know about at this point because my brother's like, that's not the stuff I share right off the bat with people.
right.
He
And
said, but
that's their story anyway,
yeah, it's
not
their
your
story.
story.
And
So,
he said
yeah.
the thing you need to know is that my dad left our mom. He didn't leave us. So anything that happened was kind of stuff that happened just as divorces sometimes happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But my sister was very young and it affected her greatly, and so that's affected her relationship with my dad. So she doesn't really know what to make of me. She is astounded that I have a relationship with him that is closer than hers.
Mm.
Um, both my brothers are as well. When I was leaving to could go back to Canada, um, it was funny because my brother had showed up late from the airport because he was away, and he was the last person I needed to meet, and it was getting dark and it was stormy. It was like that time period on the coast when there was like all these thunderstorms all the time
Mm-hmm.
back in May, and the weather wasn't great, and we had to drive through the mountains. And my dad came up to me and he's like, "Hun, you better get going. You're going to be really late when you get in." And he calls us all Hun, like all of the kids. That's how he refers to us. That's his endearment word for all of us, which I thought was cute when he started just calling me that. I was like, "Oh, that's so
Mm-hmm.
sweet. Nobody ever does that." Like I never had a parent that did that before. And but before I left, he told me he loved me. He
Oh,
gave me a big hug and he said, "I love you." And I told my brother that. He's like, "What? He told you?" Like
Does
he
he not
I mean, do
normally?
people
apparently
mellow?
not. I don't
People
know.
mellow with age, don't
I
they? And you're
guess.
Mm-hmm.
like a
And
new.
you know, I would say I'll say things to my brothers and they'll be like, "What? Dad did that? Are you kidding? Like that is not dad."
I feel
And
like
it's
I
like,
feel like
but
you may see
that's my dad, right?
ma-
Like it's
right,
different to have a grown-up relationship with your parent
right.
as opposed to have growing up with them. Like
Hmm.
my brother's like, if we had grown up together, we'd be really tight, I think, you and I.
And
And
you
I think
could,
we
and
would
you,
have because we're very much alike. My other brother's like, yeah, it would have been so you're so cool. Like, it would have been cool to grow up with you. And I'm like, well, you should talk to the siblings who actually grew up with me before you make judgment about how wonderful a sister I would have been, right? Because they might dispute you.
well,
So,
you were in a,
It's a
that's
different
really like
it
not
situation.
was, but
anything
I
you
mean,
could
it's what
compare if you,
when you're kids, it's really different than when you're
yeah,
adults. Like
for
even
sure.
even if you grow up together, you have different relationships with your siblings
It's
as an
like new
adult than you do.
beginnings. You have new
Yeah,
beginnings with your father.
yeah, it is.
Well,
And uh, yeah, so we're still in a relationship. Um, I I just actually texted with him the other day. I had like an angsty thing. I'm still really insecure in the whole thing. Like
Of course.
I hear stories about people like, yeah, it was great and we had a great thing, and then all of a sudden they were all gone. They just all vanished from my life. And it was really devastating. So I'm like, I'm really aware that that could happen. So it was my birthday the other day, and my dad has never forgot my birthday since we've been in contact. Like I always get a text from him in the morning, happy birthday, love you, kind of thing. And I woke up and there was no text. And I was like, what? This is not my dad. And I thought, well, maybe he's just hasn't sent it yet. So it gets to be lunchtime and I'm really angsting now. And my husband's just like, I'm just going to text him and ask if he forgot. So I'm like, no, no, don't do that. That's needy. And then I'm like, okay, go do that. Go ahead. So he texts my dad, and my dad instantly texts back, no, I did not forget. I've been gone all morning. I had appointments. So I
Okay.
get this text from him almost instantly. Happy birthday, love dad. And then a big emoji thing. To my beautiful daughter, I love you so much. And everything. And
Oh,
I'm sure my dad just thought, oh my God, she's like 61 years old. How could she be so needy?
He didn't think that.
No, but
yeah.
we do
We
have a
think that.
good
We think that.
I'm
That's the
needy. Like I
adoptee brain.
yeah, that probably is what it
I
is.
say
But
things and people are like, that is not what I think. You know what I mean?
yeah,
That's
no, I
us.
know, right? So like
Mhm.
I still like if I text them and I don't hear back from them, I'm just like,
Of
did I do
course.
something wrong?
Well,
Is
it's all
something
still so, new but
It
I mean,
is.
this is a really happy kind of
it
wrap
is,
up
right?
for,
Yeah.
yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
And really
I
so
too.
glad we got to hear your story, and it took so long to get here, but here we are. And I'm kind of
Yeah.
glad we kept getting pushed back because
Me
now you
too.
have a,
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
because and I was just kind of like, it would be better if I had met my family when I
You were
finally
like
do
in it
this.
in
I was
May.
still doing it, right?
Yeah.
hmm
And it but it's such a work in progress and stuff. And I'm aware that it could, just be that it's kind of fragile and it's still in its own way. Like,
Of
not that
course.
anybody would purposely try to hurt me or anything, but I'm an unknown to them. I'm always like badgering my my brothers to like talk to me and stuff. Like, can we, but they're men, right? So
They're
right there,
men.
they
man.
don't
Yeah.
they don't do friendship the way women do, right?
No.
So I feel like maybe I'm pushing too much. My sister-in-law is just always up for a conversation, and she's just like, oh great, this is wonderful. And she loves family history, so I'm always telling her stories about people. Like I was telling Tony on Blue Sky the other day, it's like nobody asks for my birth certificate when I'm telling a story about my great granny, right?
Right.
Like it's like, oh, your great granny, like I knew her or something, which I
Right.
could have had I been brought up in the family, because I was probably I was in my 20s when she died. But nobody questions you when you talk about ancient family history.
Yeah.
But when you start to talk about your parents, then it becomes obvious that you didn't grow up with them, because you don't know any personal stories. It's all
hmm
anecdote stories
Right. The
that
antidotes.
you were told by other people.
It's an interesting thing, isn't it? It's very, it's
Yeah.
it will never be fully in the family. That's just the
No,
reality.
no, we're not, and I really hate
Mhm.
that.
I do
I
too.
Like
know.
it's a thing
Mm,
that I don't think I will ever be over, the
I
fact that
don't
I
think
was
so
just kind of
either.
exiled like
Hmm.
that. And there are still family who wish that I was not around. Like my uncle would
Well, who
prefer.
cares?
He sounds
They're,
like a fun guy anyway.
yeah,
Oh,
forget him.
he's he's not a fun guy. He's
Uh,
not, but yeah, he's a whole other story.
well, Anne, thank you so much
Yeah,
for coming on and telling your
it's
story.
interesting.
Really appreciate
Oh
it.
well,
And
thank
really
you for having me. I've been like
enjoyed hearing
wanting
it.
to tell my
M-
story forever, and I
So glad.
Me
Yeah,
too.
I love that. I love that you really, and you had a full story to tell, and
I
it's,
know it really is
yeah.
interesting and complex. And
Yeah.
people should not negate the father side. Everybody
hmm
always just looks for the mother. Oh, I don't care that much. Look at the
well,
relationship.
I
It's
I even
wonderful.
told him that, I wasn't really looking for you,
Yeah, nobody really
because
is
I
at the
just
beginning.
assumed that he either left, or, he found out about me at some point and just didn't care,
Yeah,
because that's what you're told. Like your dad
Mm-hmm.
he
It's the
wasn't part of
Well,
frightening
we
it.
now
innocence.
know that
Yeah.
these stories were made up. So,
Mhm.
anybody listening who, especially in this baby scoop era, these were
Don't assume.
this was the public narrative. It probably isn't the truth. So
No,
keep,
Right.
well, I mean, and you too know different
Mhm.
people, lots of people who,
Mm-hmm.
when they find their dads are the most enthusiastic
Mhm.
about the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
Usually if there's going to be some kind of a hang up or something, it's the mom. And I know that's a lot to do with shame
Of
Mhm.
course.
and the things that
Yeah.
happen to them and stuff. I don't blame them for that. Um, but I mean, the thing is you have a kid, and even if you gave them up, you still have a responsibility. Like it's one that you didn't want, and but it's still there. Like you can't just like pretend that you don't have that obligation to at least give
Right.
people information, at the
The
very least.
Thank you for saying that.
very least.
Agree.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank
you.
it.
you.
This is wonderful. Thank you, Anne.
Okay. Bye.